بأسمائهم فلما أنبأهم بأسمائهم قال ألم أقل لكم إني أعلم غيب السماوات والأرض وأعلم ما تبدون وما كنتم تكتمون وإذ قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم فسجدوا إلا إبليس أبى واستكبر وكان من الكافرين وقلنا يا آدم اسكن أنت وزوجك الجنة وكلا منها رغدا حيث شئتما ولا تقربا هذه الشجرة فتكونا من الظالمين فأزلهما الشيطان عنها فأخرجهما مما كانا فيه وقلنا اهبطوا بعضكم لبعض عدو ولكم في الأرض مستقر ومتاع إلى حين فتلقى آدم من ربه كلمات فتاب عليه إنه هو التواب الرحيم صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Ahsan, really good job. Inshallah, next we'll have Ali Hamdani recite Ziyarat Ashura.
صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل فرجه.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا خيرة الله وابن خيرته، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوسيين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور، السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بفنائك، عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله، لقد عدمت الرزية وجلت وعدمت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام، وجلت وعدمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت، ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها. ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشيائهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله إني سلم لمن سالمكم وهرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان ولعن الله بني أمية قاتبا ولعن الله ابن مرجانا ولعن الله عمر بن سعد ولعن الله شمرا ولعن الله أمة أسرجت وألجمت وتنكبت لقتالك. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد أدم مصابي بك. فأسأل الله الذي يكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونسب لك الهار وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم وابرأوا إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانه وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشيائكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم وتقربوا إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناسبين لكم الحرب وبالبراءة من أشيائهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم وهرب لمن هاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي يكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة وأن يثبتني عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة. وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله وأن يرزقني طلب ثاركم مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عندك أن يؤتيني بمصاب بكم أفضل ما يؤتي مصاب مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكبار، اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله، في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية، عليهم منك اللعنة أبد العابدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعنة منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن الإصابة التي جاهدت الحسين والشايعات والبايعات والتابعات على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بكيت وبكي الليل والنهار، ولا جعل الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني وابدأ به أولا، ثم لعن الثاني والثالث والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا ولعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجان وعمر بن سعد وشمرا وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم، الحمد لله على عديم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا وجههم دون الحسين عليه السلام. صلوات.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد، اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد، وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين، أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فلما نسوا ما ذكروا به أنجينا الذين ينهون عن السوء وأخذنا الذين ظلموا بعذاب بئيس وأخذنا الذين ظلموا بعذاب بعيس بما كانوا يفسقون صدق الله علي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I give my condolences to each of you on the occasion which we are commemorating the aftermath of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, his companions, and his Ahlul Bayt in Karbala, and the imprisonment of Imam Zain al-Abidin, the women and the children of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. Inshallah, in this majlis, we will conclude with the commentary on sermon number 32 of Nahjul Balagha, where Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he outlines 4 personality types. The first being the aggressive personality, the second being the passive aggressive personality, and then the opportunist. And today, inshallah, we'll speak about that 4th category, which we have named as the person who is impartial or the non-committal individual. And these personality types, as Imam Ali alayhi wasalam, he describes within the context of the social political tension that existed during his time, social political tension that exists in many times. And of course, it existed in the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, a time in which people are ungrateful and they are inclined towards wrong deeds and misdeeds, misconduct. And perhaps in that setting, these 4 personality types arises, or at least we should be aware of these 4 personality types, as Imam Ali alayhi wasalam is stating, first and foremost, to guard ourselves from these traits and qualities, and number 2, so that we may understand how to interact with the folks who have these types of personality traits. When we look at the 4th personality that Imam Ali, he speaks about, the one who's impartial, this comes from, as we mentioned, someone who is introverted or extroverted. It's a quality that both the introvert and the extrovert can have. One of the common aspects between the introvert and the extrovert, when we assess or when we study the Myers-Briggs personality typology, and some of those personalities or personality types may be inclined towards being impartial about things, being non-committal. Between the extrovert and the introvert, we find that they will also have the quality of being individuals who are thinking. In other words, they may be individuals who can analyze and strategize the situation. So make a plan for themselves or make a plan for their group with regards to a particular situation and make a judgment call on what their actions should be. And that action, as we see, would be somewhat impartial. There's another name that we can give to them as well, which is based on another personality typology, which I'll get to. But first, when we look at the Myers-Briggs personality types, we see that these are thinkers and they are people who make judgment calls. They're often focused on themselves, or as that type, that personality type, are they're self-focused or focus on their particular group, which they are standing with, and not taking a stance with other individuals, or what Imam Ali, as we will study in his sermon of Nahjul Balagha, that he is concerned about these people or these folks, their stance with regards to truth and justice and establishing that which is correct, because that was the leadership type of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. So that impartial or non-committal individual is someone who is also self-preserving. Now this can rise, meaning that these folks, they can rise, or maybe they have the potential to rise to positions of leadership. However, with regards to the sermon of Imam Ali, he's not concerned with their rise to leadership, and actually he states that they do not rise to positions of leadership. Perhaps according to Myers-Briggs they could, but according to Imam Ali, these folks will not rise to the position of leadership because of their characteristic, because of their traits that we will soon discuss. According to another personality typology, and this is one of the typologies based on what is called the Enneagram of personality. The Enneagram of personality actually looks at some of the ancient psychology and synthesizes it with more modern psychology, as well as they include spiritual teachings in order to define personality types. So their results are obviously different from the Myers-Briggs. Likewise, when we study the hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, when Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam in Nahjul Balagha, as we're studying it in Sermon 32, and also in the other sermons and writings of Imam Ali, when he discusses about the personalities, of course, it's going to be different from Myers-Briggs. It's going to be different from the Enneagram of personality, because this study of personality is something that's fluid. And one of the reasons for which we study personality, as some of the scholars have stated, is because it's fascinating to understand human nature. It's fascinating to understand how people, they act and they interact with one another. Likewise, one of the scholars, he says it is also kind of a necessity to learn personalities. This is because, well, people can be dangerous. And as we have seen, as we have studied, that some of the personality types, especially if they are aggressive or they are passive-aggressive in a negative way, it can be dangerous for folks. It is those personalities which we see that stood against justice, stood against Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi stood against Imam Hussein on the plains of Karbala, or they were passive-aggressive, meaning they didn't take a stance with Imam Hussein, although they wanted to vie for power afterwards, which some folks they did. But in any case, understanding these personalities, as some scholars say, is a necessity. So that last category that Imam Ali alayhi wasallam he speaks about in Sermon 32, that we are saying that they are impartial in some sense, to some extent it's a type of passive-aggressive personality. But according to the Enneagram of personality, when we study that, the personality type that coincides with that impartial or non-committal personality that Imam Ali alayhi speaking about, they classify and name that personality type as the self-deceptive manipulator. And perhaps this is the best name for this group, that they are self-deceptive manipulator. And these are folks who tend to undermine other people. They undermine them while presenting themselves as helpers and people who can heal the pain that they actually cause other folks. they tend to prick at tender spots. In other words, they will, if there's a wound or if there's something that is a conflict between people, they actually open that wound and allow that pain to happen. They often put people down, or because by putting people down, it bolsters their own self-confidence. This is this type, the self-deceptive manipulator. They also don't allow people to forget their problems, and they reopen wounds. According to the Enneagram of Personality, this particular type, and as we will read in the sermon of Imam Ali, they said these will be people who will become a person's best friend. They'll give this front as if they are a person's best friend, but unwittingly, they will also be that person's worst enemy. According to Imam Ali alayhi in Sermon 32 of Nahjul Balagha, when he describes that last category, he says that these are the people that وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ أَقْعَدُهُ أَنْ طَلَبِ الْمُلْكِ ذُؤُولَةُ النَّفْسِ. That these are people who are too weak and they lack the means to have conquest of land. Somewhat similar to the passive-aggressive personality that Imam Ali alayhi explained in the beginning. The only difference is that Imam Ali, he says that those folks, because of their low position, they are kept down or kept away from creating mischief in the earth. Whereas the self-deceptive manipulator that is explained as this last group, that their low position, their lack of means keep them from conquering other places, keep them from rising to positions of authority and leadership. Imam Ali, he also explains or describes him as folks who they clothe themselves in the worldly robes while renouncing the world. In other words, they appear to be announcing the world, appear to be as they are hermits, as they are zahid, as they are esoterics, and don't want to have anything to do with the world. Again, this is the aspect of them being non-committal. But Imam Ali alayhi, he says, however, this is a false perception, and this is a false front that they put forth. And this is in the last part of the sermon. And before he talks about the believers and their qualities and their traits, or even their state during such social political tension. So as Imam Ali alayhi, he describes these individuals that, again, they cannot conquer land because of their position. They don't have the influence as well. This personality type was exemplified during the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi by the Khawarij. And if we look at the Khawarij, their slogan and the banner that they held up, they says, "In al-hukmu illa lillah." That's no, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can rule. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can set forth authority and set forth justice. And this is because the Khawarij, they had come to disagree with Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah. They claim that neither Imam Ali alayhi is correct, nor is Muawiyah. They claim that Imam Ali alayhi is not wrong, nor is Muawiyah. So they didn't take a clear position with regards to truth. Their criterion for thinking and judging, because this, at least according to Myers-Briggs, that this impartial or this self-deceptive manipulator, they have these qualities. If they are introvert or they are extroverts, they have the quality of thinking and making judgments. But what is the basis of their thinking? What is the basis of their judgment? When they will take two individuals, and we'll just simply refer to that, and who are in a position of leadership, who are advocating two very different things, like Imam Ali and Muawiyah, that if they're not able to discern the truth, or either they were able to discern the truth, who is doing what is right, but yet not committing to that which is right, it led them to the position that they were in. That not accepting the walayat of Imam Ali والسلام, nor accepting the Khilafah of Muawiyah, as stating that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in al-hukmu illillah, the rule is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They themselves are denouncing rule and authority. However, as Imam Ali والسلام, he says, this is kalimatul haq yuridu bihil fasad. That yes, it is true that authority and absolute authority is only with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent forth His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon this earth, to implement the Quran, to be that perfect example of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered the believers, kunu qawamina bil qist. And after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it was Amir al-Mu'mineen who was the best example to establish justice. To understand this quality of being impartial or non-committal on behalf of the Khawarij, or being the self-deceptive manipulator as the Enneagramic personality describes him, if we look to Sermon 36 of Nahjul Balagha, there in Imam Ali والسلام, he addresses the Khawarij that when they had, after the Battle of Siffin, of course their history, if we look at it, many of them were on the side of Imam Ali والسلام, to supposedly be his companions, to be those folks who would help champion justice with Imam Ali. But after the arbitration and the deception and the trick that Muawiyah played in the Battle of Siffin, making that arbitration, placing the Quran on the spears, the Khawarij, they separated from Imam Ali. They separated, and they refused to follow Imam Ali. They refused to follow Muawiyah. And then they turned against Imam Ali والسلام, to the point that they were fighting and at war with Imam Ali والسلام. And so this is what Imam Ali in Sermon 36 is addressing the Khawarij, as they had gathered their armies near the river Euphrates, Nahrawan, that they came out to fight Amir al-Mu'mineen. And as they came forth to fight Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali والسلام, spoke to them and told them that, listen, this action of yours, he says, back down from it, because initially he had warned the Khawarij even about the arbitration with Muawiyah, that this was not something that would be fruitful. Imam Ali والسلام, he also told them that in this action that you're taking against me, he says that you have no excuse before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهَذَا لَغَاتِ عَلَى غَيْرِ بَيِّنَةٍ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ. That there's no hujjah, there's no proof for your action. There's no validity for your action. وَلَا سُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ مَعَكُمْ. Nor has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed you in a position of authority to make your claims, or to establish any type of governance. Even by their own words, in al-hukm illa lillah. And if the hukum is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who should define the trajectory of Islamic politics, the trajectory of governance. And that trajectory was set forth through the Prophet of Allah and thereafter to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. So Imam Ali, he advised him in Sermon 36 that he describes him as well, that what type of individuals they are, particularly with their method of thinking. He says that you are a group whose heads are devoid of wit and intelligence. That these individuals, akhifa'ul ham, as he describes them, that your interest or your intelligence is weak. Akhifa'ul hamma wa sufaha'ul ahlam. Meaning that they are not using the right criterion for their thinking and their judgment. And because of that, again, as Imam Ali والسلام, he points out this group that they will never have the means or the ability to have the sulta, to have conquest of lands, or to rise to that level of authority. And we see this throughout the history of the Khawarij. During the time of Imam Ali, he's in the Battle of Nahrawan, that the Khawarij, that they were destroyed. Only a few of them remained living as they fled from the battle with Imam Ali ﷺ. Thereafter, once Muawiyah, he claimed the Khilafah for himself, and this is after the Shahadat of Imam Ali and after the peace treaty with Imam Hassan al-Mushtaba alayhi salatu. Muawiyah became the sole Khalifa, and even under the Khilafah of Muawiyah, the Khawarij, they disagreed with Muawiyah. They rose up and they were fighting with Muawiyah, and Muawiyah tried to destroy them all as well. However, he was not successful. And his battle with the Khawarij was different from Imam Ali. Imam Ali, he only fought them, and whoever fled, he said, don't pursue them. But Muawiyah, on the other hand, he wanted to get rid of all of them, destroy all of them. However, according to the history, this made this particular group and those who began to incline towards it, it actually grew their group, because they looked at the Khawarij, or those folks who had that ideology, as martyrs. So Muawiyah was also not able to get rid of the Khawarij. And if we look at their role, again, the role of these, you could say non-committal, at least they were non-committal in certain circumstances, non-committal to having a non-commitment with truth and justice and haqq. Because their basis of thinking, as Imam Ali والسلام, their basis of judging was incorrect. So we see that the Khawarij and those folks who survived of the Khawarij, after they were defeated by Muawiyah, they really didn't rise up. They knew about the rising of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu, going forth to establish justice, and they did not join Imam Hussein alayhi salatu. But after the aftermath of Karbala, and in fact the imprisonment of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the women and children, and the return of Imam Zayn al-Abidin and the Ahlul Bayt to Medina, when Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he began to oppose Yazid, again with a small band of Umayyads or Umayyads themselves, began to oppose Yazid and began to vie for power. According to historical accounts, some of the Khawarij, they began to join Abdullah ibn Zubayr to stand against Muawiyah. So we see that they were non-committal with regards to the truth and the justice that Imam Hussein alayhi salatu had stood up for and was intending to establish, to create islah, to reform the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he stood up, again, Abdullah ibn Zubayr himself, as we mentioned the other night, that his personality type was among that of the passive aggressive, that he did not join Imam Hussein, but yet after the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, his companions and the Ahlul Bayt at Karbala, then Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he began to vie for power against Yazid. The Khawarij joined him in this vie for power. But of course, according to history, this vie for power by Abdullah ibn Zubayr, along with his group of Umayyads and the Khawarij, was unsuccessful. At that point, it says that the Khawarij, they began to divide into two groups. One group that simply didn't want to have anything else to do with politics. They had been defeated by Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Battle of Nahrawan. They had been defeated by Muawiyah. When they stood with Abdullah ibn Zubayr, they were defeated by Yazid. So one group of the Khawarij, they were content to simply advocate their beliefs as an ideology, as one of the madhabs, as you could say, madhab al-aqaidi, one of the theological schools of thought. Whereas the other group, they continued to be political. During the time of the Abbasids, they also uprose, they rebelled, and only gained temporary control of certain lands or certain provinces. For example, they gained control of Kirman. What's this? One of the provinces in Iran. And that was temporarily under the Abbasids. They gained that control. But nonetheless, the Khawarij, they still remained within the Muslim world. Likewise with their, again, you could say skewed judgment and thinking. One example of that is that during the time of Imam Rida alayhi wasalam, when Imam Rida, he was forced by Ma'mun to be the wazir, to be the person who was next in command after Ma'mun, one of the individuals from among the Khawarij, he had vowed to go to Imam Rida alayhi wasalam and ask him the purpose of him being in the government of Ma'mun. This Khawarij, he had poisoned a dagger, and he vowed that if I don't get a good answer from Ali ibn Musa Rida, because he is the son of Rasulullah, he's Ibn Rasulullah, and he is employed or he is working with Ma'mun. Again, this shows that the Khawarij, they did not accept the governance of the Abbasids, and particularly of Ma'mun. They considered him to be corrupt. And so they were baffled that how is it that Ali ibn Musa Rida, the grandson of Rasulullah, is now in the government of Ma'mun. So this person of the Khawarij, he went forth to Imam Rida, hid the poisonous dagger in his clothes, and when he reached to Imam Rida alayhi wasalam, he said that he had a question. Imam Rida told him, he says, I will answer your question, but only after you remove the dagger from your clothing, that poisonous dagger from your clothing, and set it aside, destroy it and set it aside. This individual from the Khawarij, he was surprised that Imam Rida alayhi wasalam knew that he was carrying a dagger. So in any case, he removed it, put it aside. So he asked Imam Rida alayhi wasalam, he says, why are you working with this government? Which he deemed, as Khawarij often did, he deemed that was corrupt. That you are the son of Rasulullah, and you are taking a position in the government of Ma'mun, government of the Abbasids. So Imam Rida alayhi wasalam, he responded to him. He asked him a question. He says that, asked this Khawarij, he said, who is more on a path of disbelief? Was it the pharaohs during the time of Yusuf or the khulafa of this time, of the Abbasids? So this person from among the Khawarij, he says, well, of course, the pharaohs during the time of Yusuf. They were not muwahideen. They were not people who were monotheists. And so Imam Rida alayhi hafizatu salam, he says that Yusuf alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah. And he requested from the Pharaoh that he should be the treasurer. That he should be the treasurer of the nation. That he is fair, he is just, and he will be the treasurer. And of course, after being the treasurer, the position of Yusuf also went up. And Yusuf had a high-ranking position among the pharaohs. And of course, Yusuf, he was doing tabligh. He was calling these individuals, the pharaohs, the leadership, the people themselves, bringing them towards Islam, submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam Rida, he says that if the Prophet of Allah can go among the pharaohs and to be a part of their governance, and these folks that he was a part of their government were not muwahideen, they were not Muslim, they were not people who believed in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if that Prophet of Allah can do that, and I am the son of Rasulullah, and I'm among the people, or these, at least these khulafa and the governors, who at least they are monotheist. At least they claim La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. He says, secondly, Yusuf went by choice. And he went by choice in order to uplift the people, in order to protect those who were poor and disenfranchised in that nation, to protect those who had become believers in that nation. Imam Rida said, and I was forced to come. But like the Prophet Yusuf, again, I am here to protect the interests of the poor, the disenfranchised, those believers who say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, to keep them from being oppressed by this governance. So this individual from among the Khawarij, he accepted this statement from Imam Rida alayhi hafizatu salam. He was content and he understood. But this is to show that, as Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he pointed out with regards to the Khawarij, that again, their non-committal to truth, or even their process of thinking and judging, was incorrect. And this is what led them to their position of not accepting Imam Ali or Muawiyah. Not looking to see that which of the two is leading by the Quran and by the Sunnah of Rasulullah, who is following the path of the Quran and the Sirat of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at that point, make your decision and follow that path. So in order to conclude these personality types that we must understand, as Imam Ali, he points out in Sermon 32 of Nahjul Balagha, that we need to understand the passive aggressive type, the aggressor or the aggressive type, the opportunist, and the self-deceptive manipulator. By understanding these traits and these qualities or these personality types, it will first and foremost help us to assess ourselves, to avoid these negative or what some may call, especially in Ingramia, they call them unhealthy personality types. Help us to avoid those things. But also it will give us some direction as far as how to interact with them as well. That at times, do we need to challenge? When do we need to challenge? How do we need to challenge such negative personality types? And Imam Ali, in the latter part of Sermon 32 of Nahjul Balagha, he describes the state of the believers during that time, during this social, political tension and unrest. And he does so, he gives them the qualities according to some of the translations of Nahjul Balagha, and particularly of this sermon. Some say that this is a fifth typology or personality that Imam Ali he describes. But when we look at what he states, he is mainly focused on giving advice to the believers. And this is because in the beginning of that sermon, he says the people are of Arba'at Asnaf, 4 types. He doesn't say 5 types. 4 types. And of course, the fifth group, or this latter group, which he's trying to advise, are the believers who he describes in Sermon 32 as the people who remember the Day of Judgment. They remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They realize that their actions will be taken account of. So they are praying, they're crying, they have taqwallah, they have khushu', they are fearing Allah. They are also folks who are preaching. In other words, they are enjoining the good and forbidding what's wrong. These are individuals, as he says, that even when they are preaching or they have talked, they have tried to guide people and coach them towards the right direction to the point that they have been oppressed. When we look at the advice of Imam Ali, then he gives the advice. He tells them that they should stay away from the dunya, not run after the dunya, not to be like those personality types that Imam Ali والسلام, he describes in earlier in the sermon, that they have made this dunya thamatun nafs, that the dunya has become the price of their soul, or that they are only kept away from spreading corruption and mischief in the earth because of their lowly selves. No, that they should focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and take the example of those who have come before, so that the people who come behind you also can take the best example. They can see your example. And of course, those who have come before, none other than the Prophet of Allah, the prophets, all of the prophets, and the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Imams alayhim afsalatu. He tells this group, the believers, take their example of how they interacted. So that if we are to outline a particular personality for the believers, then we could call that personality is a principled personality. A principled personality of leaders, of leadership, or a principled teacher. And this is what the Enneagrammy personality they will call such a healthy personality trait. They will be heroes. They will be principled leaders and teachers. They educated themselves by that example that came before them, by the example of Rasulullah, by the example of the A'immah alayhim afsalatu wasalam, and then they became examples for others. As Imam Ali, this is his advice to them, that look to the example of those who came before you, so that you will be an example for those folks who will come after you. And if we take the example of those who come before, the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the A'immah alayhim afsalatu wasalam, then of course that will end in a person being a valiant hero. A hero like Imam Hussein, a hero like Imam Sajjad, a hero like Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, because they understood those personalities in their lifetime and in their particular social political context, and they engaged in the best of manners. That their personality type, whether introvert and extrovert, thinking, intuitive, sensing, feeling, was perfect in every manner. And so we see the engagement of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam with the various personalities of their time in the best of manners. And simply to give some sort of correlation between some of the personality types or actions of personality type. We could say that, well, a person who is in that difficult situation, they may be introverted at times, making their prayers, making dua. And again, we find several du'as from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam against the zalimeen, against the oppressors, against the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But likewise, we see extroverted actions from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam as well. The rising up of Imam Hussein alayhi afsalatu wasalam against the oppressors of his time. The stance and positioning and posture of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam against the folks who were standing in the battle of Jamala, battle of the camel, and the battle of Safin, and the battle of Nahriwan, that they took action as well. So that personality type, which is a principled personality type of a principled leader or teacher or hero, we find also in one of the very beautiful statements by Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, and particularly in reference to verse 165 of Surah Al-A'raf, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about those folks who فَلَمَّا نَسُوا مَا ذُكِّرُوا بِهِ أَنْجَيْنَا الَّذِينَ يَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ السُّوءِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about those individuals who He saves. And He saves them because they forbid evil. They warn people against evil. In other words, one part of establishing justice is to get rid of evil, get rid of mischief. And so those individuals who have warned others against mischief, misdeeds, that they will be saved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Sadiq, with regards to that verse, he says that, who are these folks who were warning against evil? Imam Sadiq, he says, Kanu thalathatu asnafin sinfun. He says, when you look at the personality types, and of course, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar is one of the qualities that a believer should have and must have. And so, when you look at this particular trait and quality with regards to su, with regards to wickedness, with regards to evil, Imam Ali says you can divide people into also three personality types with regards to this duty and this responsibility, this social, political duty and responsibility. He says, "I'tamaru wa amaru fanajaw." He says that these are people who showed it in their actions, meaning that they not only abstained from mischief, wickedness, evil, injustice. Not only did they abstain from it, amaru, and they commanded people to stay away from it. They were vocal about it, yet they were extrovert about calling people away from injustice, protesting injustice. Then he says, sinfun i'tamaru wa lam ya'muru. He says, and then there's a group who they were abstaining from injustice themselves, mischief and wrongdoings, but they never called anyone out. They never protested against that injustice or misdeed. He says, and those people, fa musikhu darran. He says, and these people were like ants. Yes, they did not commit any injustice. However, they did not speak out against injustice. So they are small, they are minute, according to Imam Sadiq, like ants. Then Imam Sadiq, he says, وَالسِّنْفٌ لَمْ يَأْمُرُوا وَلَمْ يَأْتَمِرُوا وَلَمْ يَأْمُرُوا فَهَلَكُوا. He says, and that third group of people, that third personality, is the one that not only did not heed this warning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to stay away from mischief or injustice. In other words, they engaged in mischief and injustice. And likewise, they did not call people away from that, but rather they advocated for injustice and mischief. And of course, this personality is very clear in the events of Karbala and the aftermath of Karbala. Yazid, Umar ibn Sa'ad al-Shamr, Ibn Ziyad, very clear in their actions and what they were advocating. And it's stated that when the Shuhada, the heads of the Shuhada, had been ushered into the court of Yazid, according to Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he says that in the court of Yazid, there was a person that was in the court. He was a guest of the court of Yazid and a nobleman, from what Imam Zayn al-Abidin he had stated. This noble individual, when he saw the prisoners enter into the court and the head of Imam Hussein being presented before Yazid upon a platter, where Yazid, he was drinking. This wazir, he was a Safir of the Byzantine Empire. He was a minister of the Byzantine Empire. So he asks Yazid, he says, what is this head? And Yazid asks him, he says that, Ma laka wa hadha ar-ra's? So what is it to you? This ambassador for the Byzantine Empire, he said that, well, I will be questioned about everything that happened during my stay here. He says, and so this is one of the things that's happened, and apparently you have established this party, this celebration due to your victory. So explain to me, what is this victory? What is this celebration? And what does it mean? Who is this head? So Yazid told him, he says, this is the head of Hussein ibn Ali. So then this ambassador, he asks, he says, and who is his mother? Yazid responded, his mother is Fatima binti Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At that point, when he heard this, he says, Waylakum, that woe be unto you. Woe be unto your nations. He says that what type of deen is this? That you kill the grandson of Rasulullah. And this ambassador, he began to describe, he says that I am a descendant of Nabi Dawood alayhi salam. He says, however, there's between me and Dawood, he says, there are many fathers. He says, it takes sometimes for me to trace my lineage back to Dawood, but nonetheless, I am able to trace my lineage back to Nabi Dawood. He says, and because of this, he says, in the Byzantine Empire, he says, I have a lot of respect. That people, they come and they take tabarruk by the dirt that's under my feet. He says, but here is the grandson of Rasulullah that is only separated from Rasulullah by his daughter. And you killed the grandson of Rasulullah. He says, what type of deen is this? What type of action is this? He says, if this is what your deen advocates, then he says, my deen is better than that of yours. This wazir, he began to also explain to Yazid. He asked him, he says, have you ever heard of this Kanisatu Hafir, the church of the hoof? So Yazid said, no, what is this church of the hoof? He said that this is a church that is on an island. He says, and it takes about a year to get to this. If when you're in the sea going towards China, it takes about a year to get to it. In other words, it takes quite some time. And this island, he said, is 24 miles wide, 24 miles long. And there you will find a lot of churches. But there's one that sits in the center. It's called the Kanisatul Hafir, the Church of the Hoof. He says, and in this church, there's a, what you call it, the hoof or the horseshoe of a donkey, of a himar, that it is said that Isa ibn Maryam, that the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, that he rode upon this donkey, and the hoof or the horseshoe is actually there in that church. He said it's like a ornament there, a monument there. He says, and Christians, they come from all over to go and they make tawaf around this church. Some go and they make their dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the barakah of simply a shoehorn that's in this church. Simply because they believe that this is from one of the donkeys that Isa ibn Maryam rode. He says, and when they showed this much respect, simply to a shoehorn, that how is it that you, Yazid, that you would disrespect the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? When Yazid, he heard this, and the men, they heard this from the ambassador to the Byzantine Empire, then Yazid said that he began to fear. He says that if he goes back to the Byzantine Empire and he explains that what has happened, that how we have martyred the grandson of Rasulullah, how we have martyred the companions, how we have killed and murdered the family members of Rasulullah, and imprisoned the women and children of Rasulullah, of this household, that what disgrace would come upon Yazid. So Yazid, he made the intentions to kill this wazir. He said, well, you will be killed at this point. He called to his men, he says, "Uqtulu hadha Nasrani." Then this Christian man, this Christian wazir, he looked at Yazid. He says, "Are you really going to kill me?" And he said, "Yes." Yazid said, "Yes." Then at that point, this wazir, he says, "Now I have understood. Alan fahmtul manam." He says, "Now I have understood the dream that I had last night." He said that in his dream, he dreamt that Rasulullah had come to him. And when he saw Rasulullah, he told him, he says, "Anta min ahl al-jannah," that you are from among the people of paradise. He was wondering that how is it that the Prophet of Islam, he's telling me as a Nasrani, as a Christian, that I am from among the people of paradise, that I will gain paradise. And he thought that this was strange, that how do I gain paradise and I have not accepted Muhammad as the messenger of Allah. He says, but now I understand. Now I see the truth. That what has happened, that you have martyred and you have killed the grandson of Rasulullah. And you have killed this person who is a symbol of justice. He said that this Nasrani, this wazir, he took the head of Imam Hussein and he held it close to his chest and he began to say, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah." He says, "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is Rasulullah." He was bearing witness with the head of Imam Hussein in his arms, held tight to his chest. He was bearing witness to the injustice of Yazid and the sense of justice of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He said that he held on to the head of Imam Hussein until Yazid's men struck him down. وإنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون اللهم بحق هذا المجلس الحسيني اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشف مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لوائه بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. معتم حسين.
Assalamualaikum. Again, the Urdu program is still going on. Those who want to join can go there. Inshallah, we'll send an email out for next week's lectures with Sheikh Mehdi Rastani.